Hi, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Gita. Thanks for joining us. Bloodshed and burials are overshadowing the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. New protests erupted along the Gaza border and in the West Bank today. Palestinian demonstrators burned tires and threw rocks at Israeli soldiers and police.
This comes after yesterday's staggering wave of violence. Nearly 60 people were killed and thousands were injured in deadly protests. Holly Williams takes a closer look at the volatile situation, and we want to warn you that some of the video can be graphic for some viewers.
They carried their dead to be buried here in Gaza, including several children caught up in the bloodshed. More than 1,300 people are alive but suffered gunshot wounds, according to Palestinian officials. Most of the dead were killed along the border fence that separates the tiny, poverty-stricken Gaza Strip from Israel, where tens of thousands of Palestinians held angry demonstrations yesterday, furious after the U.S. Embassy was moved to Jerusalem. Israel responded with deadly force. Live ammunition aimed at those it says got too close to the fence. The Palestinians hope East Jerusalem will one day be their capital if they ever get their own state. And they are furious over what they say is American bias towards Israel.
We are against the President Trump.
Hakam Abu Shanab is a financial analyst and was one of the protesters.
Are you willing to die here?
We don't have any other method that we could use instead of, dying here is the only way.
The Israeli military says it also launched airstrikes yesterday, targeting a camp run by Hamas, the militant group that controls the Gaza Strip. And Israeli media is reporting that Israel has threatened to assassinate Hamas leaders if the violent protests continue.
And CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams is joining us now from Gaza. Holly, take us through the scene today in the aftermath of yesterday's violence.
Yeah, I think that people here in the Gaza Strip are quite shocked by the bloodshed that they saw yesterday. I mean, they've been holding these protests now along the fence that separates Gaza from Israel for 6 weeks, and there'd been loss of life. Up until yesterday, around 40 people had been killed. Israel had been criticized for, a quote, excessive use of force. Tens of thousands of people went to the fence yesterday, huge numbers. But I don't think anyone was ready to see so many people dying. The death toll, according to officials here, is now more than 60. That includes several children and also an 8-month-old baby, a little girl, Layla Al-Gandour, who died of tear gas inhalation. She was buried today. And just a few minutes earlier, we saw 2 Palestinian men who were killed yesterday, buried here today at Martyrs Cemetery in the Gaza Strip. Now, there were more protests planned for today to mark the 70th anniversary of what Palestinians call their day of catastrophe following the founding of the State of Israel. But so far, following the violence yesterday, very few demonstrators have gone up to the border fence.
So, Holly, you've talked to some of the Palestinians out there protesting earlier. This is video from yesterday. Earlier, we were showing what was happening in Ramallah today. They're a long way from Jerusalem, where the U.S. Embassy was opening up. What is their end game here? What are they hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Palestinians generally, and specifically who live here in the Gaza Strip, want a lot of things. They want their own state. They want the capital of their state to be East Jerusalem, which is part of the reason that they are so furious about the U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem. These protests initially, when they began about 6 weeks ago, were termed the Great March of Return, and the idea was that Palestinians who live here in Gaza want to return to lands that their families fled in 1948 after the founding of the State of Israel. There are about 2 million people living here in Gaza, and 2/3 of them are either refugees or their descendants. I think there are more general frustrations as well, specifically here in Gaza, where they've experienced a blockade now for more than 10 years, and they have a whole host of problems, including contaminated water, power cuts, really high unemployment at nearly 50%, and shortages of goods. I think the problem, though, is that these protests certainly an opportunity for Palestinians to vent their frustration, but arguably they don't really do anything for the Palestinians. I mean, most of the Palestinian protesters are peaceful. Those that are violent are largely armed with rocks and slingshots and are burning tires. You know, they don't inflict any serious damage on Israel, and they don't necessarily sway world opinion. And arguably, they only serve to alienate opinion in Israel even further.
Holly, yesterday, the White House deputy spokesperson Raj Shah called the responsibility for violence. He said it rested squarely, I'm quoting him now, squarely with Hamas, even though nearly most of the Palestinians that have been killed over the last couple of weeks have been killed through Israeli live fire, launching airstrikes, as you've seen over the last couple of days. Explain the significance of Hamas. We had a spokesperson from the Israeli government here on CBSN yesterday. She very much said the same thing that Raj Shah said. She also said that Hamas does not provide any services for people living in the Gaza Strip. But back in 2007, when they won the special elections against the secular Fatah group, they were promising people that they were going to make their lives better. Have they?
I think it's been very difficult for them to make people's lives better here when the Gaza Strip has been suffering the effects of this blockade. I mean, to be clear, Hamas is an Islamist militant group that's been in power here in the Gaza Strip since 2007. They weren't the original instigators of these protests, as we understand it, but they certainly have encouraged them. They've certainly supported them. And I suppose some would argue that they've done so cynically because they think that if they encourage Palestinians to go and protest at the border fence, some of them will be killed by Israelis, and that might go some way to swaying public opinion in their favor. But remember also that though Israel says that it has been acting in self-defense, others have criticized it for what they see as an excessive use of force. And in fact, the UN has criticized what happened yesterday as appalling, deadly violence.
Holly Williams, thank you so much.